The cardboard box groaned under its own weight as I heaved it over the threshold. Dust, ancient and fine, puffed up from the floorboards to greet it, dancing in the long, lonely shafts of late afternoon light. The air tasted of dead flies and forgotten years. Another box down. Maybe 20 to go. I nudged it with my foot, sliding it against a wall papered with faded, yellowing roses. "Just get it done," I muttered, the words swallowed by the house's deep quiet. My voice sounded foreign here, an unwelcome intrusion. Each trip back to the truck was a penance. The gravel crunched under my boots, the autumn air was sharp and clean, and then I'd step back inside, back into the stale tomb. This was the plan. A quiet place. A place where the only sounds were the ones I made myself. A place to pay the price in solitude. I slit the tape on a box marked kitchen and started pulling out plates, each one wrapped in old newspaper. The headlines were from a life that wasn't mine anymore. A life with two of everything. I set a single plate on the dusty counter. The sound was small. That's when I heard it first. A faint scratching. It was a dry, insistent sound, like a rat's nail dragging along the inside of a wall. It came from the far side of the living room, near the boarded-up fireplace. I stopped, a coffee mug halfway out of the box. I listened. The house settled around me, groaning softly as old houses do. The wind picked at the eaves. Nothing more. "Rats," I said a little louder this time, as if to convince the walls themselves. Of course, old house in the middle of nowhere. It was a nuisance, nothing more. A small tax on the isolation I'd paid so much for. I forced myself back to the task, unwrapping another mug, then another, placing them in the cabinet with deliberate, controlled motions. I would not let a simple pest unnerve me. I would not let this place win before I'd even spent a night in it. The scratching didn't come back. The sun bled away behind the skeletal trees, leaving the sky a bruised purple. I didn't bother with more than one lamp, leaving the corners of the big room submerged in shadow. I ate a can of cold soup, standing at the counter. The silence pressed in. It wasn't a comfortable quiet. It was heavy, an absence of sound that made my own breathing feel loud, my own chewing an act of vandalism. I washed the single spoon and the can in the rust-stained sink and went upstairs. The bed was just a mattress on the floor, the sheets smelling of the box they'd been in. I was too tired to care. I stripped down to my boxers and lay down, pulling a thin blanket over me. Sleep. That's all I wanted, the great eraser. I must have drifted off, because the sound pulled me back up from the blackness. It wasn't scratching. Thump. A pause. Just long enough for me to wonder if I'd imagined it. Thump. My eyes were wide open in the dark. The sound was low, muffled, coming from the wall my mattress was pushed against. It wasn't the sharp crack of a house settling. This was dull. Heavy. Intentional. Thump. 3 times. A pattern. My irritation was a hot spike that pushed through the initial chill. God damn it. It had to be a branch. A thick one, swaying in the wind, knocking against the siding. It was the only logical thing. Annoying, but logical. I wouldn't get a wink of sleep with that rhythm drilling into my skull. Throwing back the blanket, I felt the cold floorboards shock my bare feet. The air in the house was colder than it should be. I pulled on my jeans and a thick sweatshirt, the fabric rough against my skin. Downstairs, I grabbed the heavy, metal flashlight from the kitchen counter. Its weight felt good in my hand. Solid. Real. I'd find the branch. I'd take the handsaw to it in the morning. Problem solved. The deadbolt on the front door made a loud, grating sound as I turned it. The noise echoed in the entryway. Outside, the world was still. There was no wind. Not a whisper. The tall pines that ringed the property stood like black statues against the star-dusted sky. No rustle of leaves, no sway of branches. My breath plumed in the cold air, a temporary cloud in the profound stillness. I walked around the side of the house, the flashlight beam cutting a clean, white path ahead of me. My boots crunched on fallen leaves and twigs. I reached the wall, the same wall my bedroom was on, and pointed the light up. Nothing. The siding was old clapboard, painted a peeling white that looked ghost gray in the flashlight's beam. There wasn't a single tree branch within 10 feet of it. The nearest pine was a good 15, maybe 20 feet away, its lowest branches far too high to reach the house. There was nothing there. Nothing to make the sound. A cold knot tightened in my gut. This wasn't right. I switched off the flashlight, plunging myself into darkness. I stood there, a shadow among shadows, and just listened. For a full minute, there was only the sound of my own blood pulsing in my ears. Maybe it was the pipes, water hammer, an old boiler kicking on. I was looking for reasons, any reason, throwing them against the silence and hoping one would stick. Then I did something foolish. I stepped forward, my body just a few inches from the wall. I leaned in, hesitated, and then pressed my ear against the cold, painted wood. The chill seeped through my sweatshirt, into my shoulder. It felt like putting your ear to a block of ice. I held my breath. Thump. The vibration traveled directly through the wood, into the bones of my skull. It was louder here, muffled, yes, but undeniably clear. And it was coming from inside. Thump. Not from the pipes in the basement. Not from the attic. From the space between the outer siding and the inner wall. Thump. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. This was not a branch. This was not a rat. This was not the boiler. It was in the wall. It was inside the house. With me. I didn't run. I scrambled. My feet tangled. I nearly fell, pushing off the wall, as if it had burned me. I fumbled with the flashlight, switched it on, the beam wobbling crazily across the overgrown yard. The front door. I had to get to the front door. I burst back inside, not caring about the noise I was making, and slammed the heavy oak door shut. My hand was shaking as I fumbled with the deadbolt. It slid home with a percussive clack that sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive quiet. I leaned back against the door, my chest heaving, sucking in gulps of the stale, dusty air. My knuckles were white where I gripped the flashlight. Silence. A thick, waiting silence. My eyes darted around the dark living room, scanning the deep shadows in the corners, the hulking shapes of cardboard boxes. I was a cornered animal. I held my breath, straining my ears, listening past the frantic drumming in my chest. Nothing. The house was a statue. The air was still. Too still. I was just about to let out a shaky breath, just about to call myself a fool, when it came again. Thump. It was on the door. The door I was leaning against. The impact slammed through the wood and into my spine. A physical blow that threw me forward. I yelped, a pathetic strangled sound, and stumbled into the middle of the room. I spun around, the flashlight beam dancing wildly, pointing at the door. It was just a door. Solid oak. Locked. But the sound had come from it. I was sure of it. I backed away slowly, step by step, putting as much distance as I could between myself and every wall. I stood in the absolute center of the floor, a man on a tiny island, surrounded by a hostile shore. I felt watched. The dark corners of the room felt like open mouths. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. It was a listening silence. A waiting silence. I stood frozen, my muscles screaming, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand, painting jittery circles on the floorboards. My mind was a frantic mess, a high-pitched whine of pure fear. How? Who? What? The questions were useless. They had no answers. There was only the here and the now, the cold and the dark and the waiting. And then, through the silence, another sound. This one was different. It wasn't a thump. It was soft. Softer than a breath. A tiny wisp of a sound, threading its way through a crack in the plaster of the wall nearest the fireplace. I almost missed it. I almost convinced myself it was the wind, even though I knew there was no wind. It was a whisper. Faint. Fragile, like the rasp of dry leaves skittering across pavement. It was barely a sound at all, more a feeling in the air. But it formed a word. One word. And a voice. God. The voice. It ripped through the years, a key turning a lock deep inside me that I had tried to cement shut forever. It was a voice I heard every night in my dreams, a voice I would have given my soul to never hear again. Cold. The sound was a sliver of ice in my ear. A name. A ghost. My throat closed. The air in my lungs turned to stone. For a full minute I did not move. I did not breathe. I stood in the absolute center of the living room, gripping the heavy metal flashlight, its beam a perfect, unwavering circle on the floorboards in front of me. The voice was gone, but the single word it left behind echoed not in the room, but in the chambers of my own skull. Cold. It was her word. The last thing she had said. I stayed like that for a long time, An hour. Maybe more. Time had detached from the clock on the wall. It was now measured in the frantic beat of my own heart against my ribs. I did not dare move toward a wall. I did not dare turn my back on the shadows that pooled in every corner like black water. The house was a creature holding its breath, and I was trapped in its lungs. Finally, a tremor started in my legs, a deep, uncontrollable shudder that worked its way up my spine. Survival instinct. It was the only thing that broke the paralysis. Slowly, one stiff, robotic step at a time, I walked backwards toward the stairs. My eyes scanned the darkness, every murky shape a potential threat. My head swiveled from the boarded-up fireplace to the dark maw of the kitchen doorway. The flashlight beam cut through the gloom, a nervous, jerky sword. I reached the bottom of the staircase and started up, backwards, never taking my eyes off the first floor. Each stair creaked under my weight, a protest in the crushing stillness. In the bedroom, I did not go near the bed. I did not go near the wall. I dragged the mattress to the very center of the floor, a miserable raft in a sea of unknown terror. I sat on it, my back straight, my knees pulled up to my chest. The flashlight was pointed at the closed bedroom door. I would not sleep. I would watch the door until morning. The sun did not rise with any sense of triumph. It seeped into the sky, a weak gray light that did little to chase away the night. It only served to illuminate the grime on the windows and the thickness of the dust on every surface. My body ached with a tension so profound it felt like I had been beaten. My eyes were burning, raw from staring into the darkness for hours. My throat was sandpaper. I needed coffee. The thought was mundane. It was normal. I clung to it. Downstairs, the house felt different in the daylight. Less menacing, more pathetic. Just an old, forgotten structure of wood and plaster. The chill was still there, a damp cold that had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. I dismissed it. I was tired. My mind was playing tricks on me. Grief. Guilt. That's what the voice was. That's what the thumps were. My own mind. Punishing me. It was the only explanation that made sense. The only one I could live with. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle from the tap, the water running brown for a few seconds before clearing. I put it on the stove, the scrape of metal on metal gratingly loud. I opened a box, found a jar of instant coffee and the single mug I'd unpacked. The familiar ritual was a small comfort. While I waited for the water to boil, I leaned against the counter and fumbled in my jeans pocket for my truck keys. I needed to go into town, get supplies. Wood for the fireplace. A rat trap. Something to make this place feel less like a crypt. My fingers were clumsy from exhaustion. The keys slipped, clattering onto the worn linoleum floor. Shit, I rasped. I bent down, my back protesting, and picked them up. I straightened up, tossing the keys onto the sticky countertop. And then I froze. Something was there. Something that wasn't there a second ago. It was small. Red. A tiny, die-cast metal car. The paint was chipped at the fenders, the black plastic wheels worn smooth. It sat perfectly still next to the jar of coffee. I stared at it. My brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. I had been in this kitchen for less than 24 hours. I had unpacked one box. A box with plates and mugs. I had not unpacked any boxes from the attic of my old life, filled with things I couldn't bear to look at. This was not mine, but it was familiar. Sickeningly familiar. My hand moved on its own, a slow, hesitant motion to pick it up. My fingers stopped an inch away. No, it was a coincidence. The previous owners must have left it. A child's toy, forgotten on a high shelf, and my fumbling for the keys had knocked it down. That had to be it. It was the only logical thing. I shoved it aside with the back of my hand. A small metal object scraped against the grimy surface of the counter, coming to a rest near the sink. I would not touch it. I would not acknowledge it. The kettle began to whistle, a piercing shriek that made me jump. I poured the hot water into the mug, my hand shaking so badly that some of it sloshed over the side, scalding my fingers. The pain was a welcome distraction. It was real. I took the mug and walked into the living room. The reception was spotty, but I needed to make a call. I needed to hear another human voice. I pulled out my phone, found the number for the moving company. One of my boxes was missing. The one with my tools. I needed my tools. Yes, my name is Ethan Cole, I said, my voice sounding strained. The delivery to 142 Blackwood Road. I think you're missing a box. It's a heavy-duty plastic tote. It should be marked garage. The woman on the other end was polite, distant. She tapped on a keyboard. The sound was comforting. I paced the length of the living room as she checked, my boots leaving prints in the dust. I kept my back to the kitchen. "I'm not seeing it here, Mr. Cole," she said. My driver marked all items as delivered and signed off. "Are you sure it's not somewhere in the house?" "I'm sure," I said, my irritation rising. "It's a big gray box. I can't miss it." "Well, I can put in a query, but it might take a few days. Is there anything else?" "No, that's it." I hung up, a fresh wave of frustration washing over me. "Of course. Just one more thing." I turned, running a hand through my greasy hair, and started back toward the kitchen to get my coffee. I stopped dead in the doorway. The red car was no longer on the counter. It was in the middle of the floor, placed directly in my path, perfectly centered in the doorway, as if waiting for me. The weak morning light from the kitchen window glinted off its worn roof. My breath hitched. No, that wasn't possible. There was no one here. The doors were locked. I was alone. It couldn't have moved. I looked from the floor to the counter by the sink. The space where it had been was empty. I looked back at the toy on the floor. It hadn't fallen. It had been placed. I could feel it. The simple, undeniable, insane fact of it settled in my stomach like a block of ice. "What the fuck?" The words were a whisper, barely air. My heart started its frantic, heavy thudding again. This wasn't guilt. This wasn't my mind. This was happening. I took a hesitant step into the kitchen, my eyes locked on the toy. I crouched down, my joints cracking in protest. My hand trembled as I reached for it. For a moment, I just looked at it. A cheap toy. Harmless, but it felt heavy with an impossible wrongness. I had to know. I had to touch it. I had to prove to myself it was just a thing. My fingers closed around the cool, smooth metal. The instant my skin made contact, every light in the house went out. The hum from the refrigerator died. The low groan of the boiler in the basement ceased. The world plunged into absolute darkness, and a silence so complete and sudden that it was a physical blow. I was on my knees in the kitchen, clutching the tiny car, enveloped in a suffocating blackness. I didn't scream. The air was too thick to breathe. I was frozen, my knuckles white where they gripped the toy, my ears straining against the void. And then the knocking started. It wasn't the slow, deliberate thump from last night. This was different. It came from below me, from the basement. And it was fast. Frantic, a desperate, rhythmic hammering against the floorboards from underneath. Thump, 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 thump. It was a code, a plea, a terrified drumming that vibrated up through the soles of my boots and into my bones. Panic, pure and undiluted, finally broke through my paralysis. It was a chemical surge, a primal scream in my blood that said, "Get out." I scrambled to my feet, my mind a blank wall of white noise. I had to get rid of it. The car. It was the car. I drew my arm back and hurled the toy with all my strength. It flew across the dark room, a tiny, unseen projectile. It hit the far wall with a pathetic little clack. The knocking stopped. The silence that rushed back in was worse. It was heavy, attentive. And inside that silence, a new sound was born. It came from all around me, from nowhere and everywhere at once. A child's whisper, but it wasn't faint this time. It was clear and sharp and filled with a dreadful, inconsolable sorrow. "Give it back." The air pressure in the room shifted. A low hum vibrated in my chest and my ears popped, as if the house itself had just inhaled. The whisper was inside my head. It was in my teeth. I clapped my hands over my ears, a guttural sound of pure terror finally ripping from my throat. I staggered backwards, tripping over something, crashing hard against the kitchen cabinets. My phone. I needed my phone. I patted my pockets with shaking, useless hands. The phone was in my back pocket. I ripped it out, my thumb fumbling on the screen, smearing it with sweat. I swiped up, stabbing at the icon for the flashlight. A thin, powerful beam of white light cut through the black. I was on the floor, panting, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I scrambled up, pointing the beam around the room in a wild, erratic dance. The sink, the stove, the grimy linoleum, the table, the doorway. Nothing, no one, just the dirty, empty kitchen. It was just an old house, an empty house. My breath was coming in ragged, painful gasps. I leaned against the counter, trying to get control, trying to force logic into a situation that had none. The beam from my phone shook, casting distorted, leaping shadows on the walls. I swung the light towards the wall I had thrown the car at. The beam slid across the peeling, water-stained wallpaper. And then it stopped. My breathing stopped. My heart stopped. There, on the wall, starkly illuminated in the cold LED light, new words had appeared. They weren't written in ink or paint. They were traced in the thick, gray dust that coated everything. The lines were small and neat, as if drawn by a single, determined finger. Save me! Dien Thuy Tre Thuy Nam Trong Tai. Anh Sung Run Ray. Nhung Con Chu Nam Tren Thuy Trace Thuy Thuy. Thuy Trace Thuy Trace Thuy Trace. Care or Hor John Do. Thuy Tre Huang Do. Thuy Trace Thuy Trace. Thuy Point Trace. Thuy Dima Thuy Quang Dap. Thuy Dien Dong Le. The joy Thuy Play Chui Con Vate Sung Trang Tu Chui Fia Thuy Va He Thuy Do. Chung Duok Viet Bang Bui. Mot Ngon Te Dava Tre Tre Tre. Mot Ngon Te Trua Mot Dua Tre. Con Huang Lon Trong Long Which Thuy Kong Bien Mat. No Chi Te Doi Hing Dang. Kong Ko Dat Lan Lo Quan Oi King Huang Tuan Thuy Tan Ra. Yung Cho Cho Motu Gido Kak Motu Nong Bong Ba Nuk Nyoi. Thuy Loi. Sukwan Tuok Den Dao Don. Yung Lan Nai No Kong Fai La Tu Zangam Nyam Toi Tu Ben Chong. No Koko Zo Tat Mot Kio Chen Bak Tuong Do. Moting Kiu Ku. Motling Ham Bi Maket. Kiong Nyu Toi Chikak La No Bigiem Kam Boy Yung Bak Tuong Nai. Chukong Fai Boy Kiuk. Va Trong Mot Hoang Hak Dien Ro. Jualo Bui Ban Vasumuch Nat. Toi Kam Tai Mot Tia Hivong. Mot Ko Hoi. Kong Fai De Tron Chai. Mala De Doi Mat. Kong Fai Kwa Hu Chua Toi. Mala Chua Mot Ngoi Hat. Ne Toi Ko the Kuno. Ne Toi Ko the Jai. Tho At Chuno Kole. Chiko Le Thoi. Toi Kong Ko the Tim Le Mot Chutban Yen Cho Riengman. Toi Epman Fai Kudong. Kako Goi Kyo Rang Rak. Kiu Toi Dung De. Sanya Langa Doi Chan Toi. Toi Kan Tong Tin. Toi Kam Biat Trien Gida Seza A Day. Toi Di Kwa Fong Kak. Moi Bok Chan La Mot No Luk Chua I Chi. An Den Tu Dien Toi Kwa. Toi Quait Kwa Nyung Tam Ga Tre Juong Pu De Bui Trendodak. Trong Nyung Nyung Tam Vai Liam. Toi Den Fung An Noi Toi Da Da Chik Me Ting Hak De Kwa Min Len Chik Ban Go Soi Nung Trick. Toi Bat No Len. Man Hing Koi Dan Patara Mot Eng Sang Hanyat De Chu Trong Bong Toi. Toi Pai Lam Viek. NHANH. Pin Sing Kong Kyo De Mai. Toi Mo Tring Du Yet Web. Kak Won Te Toi Tung De Va Vung Vetren Ban Fim. Toi Go Dia Chi Chu Tuang Ngoynya. 142 Blackwood Road. Ket Kwatim Kim Hindra. Nhung Ket Noi Chap Chom Mot Kach Ko Chu. Biu Tuong Wi-Fi A Gok Man Hing Nyap Nyai Chi Ko Mot Vaik. Kak Chang Web Tai Cham Mot Kach Dao Don. Kak Hing Ang Hin Za Tung Dong. Nhung Bai Bao Ku. Ho Sonya Dat. Toi Nheo Mat Him Vong Man Hing. Ko Gang Chat Lok Thong Tin Tu Nhung Don. Van Ban Bivo. Ho Horn Bitham. Toi Dak Duok Mot Dong Tit. Jia Ding Miller. Mo Chai Ten. Ko Kon Ganyo Sara. Da Kong Kwa Koi. Chan Toi Nyu Hua Da. Sara. Mot Duatre. Chek Shi Hoi Do Choi Mao Do. Tieng Go. Tieng Ti Tam Tatsakop Voi Nhau. Toi Ko Ganyap Vol Mot Lien Kit. Mot Bai Bao De Du Hon. Nhung Trang Web Ku Quay Tron. Kong the Kit Noi Hing Ratrin Man Hing. Toi Chui the. Dap Nyevo Bandi Chuot. Vo Ik. Tin Hu the Mat Han. Suda Fong Dung Len Trong Ko Hong Toi. Toi Gap Man Chiek Mai Ting Hak Tai Lai. Han Dong Le Taura Mot Ting Dong Lon Trong Kan Fong Ting Mit. Toi Ngoi Do Trong Bong Toi. Chikon Lai An Sang Yu Up to Chiek Dien Toi. Toi Fei Lam Gi Bei Jio. Toi La Mot Ngoi Dan Ong Voi Mot Bo Dung Ko Bi That Lak. Mot Chiek Dien Toi Sapit Pin. Va Mot Len Hon Dang Kao Jin Sugyuk Do Tu Ben Duoi Chan Min. Toi Dua Te Len X Ormat. Kam Te Lopro Lom Chom Balan Delanam. Hi Toi Hate Huang. Toi Nima Wonap Meeting Hachte. Duoi Ansang Toi Dien Toi. Toi Nyen Te Mot Tu Gidu. Mot Lop We Mong Da Pulen Be Mat Nyua Den Bang. Chuyen Ne That La. Toi Chak Chan No Da Sak Se Ki Toi Mo No Ravai Foot Truok. Tio Ban Nang. Toi Quet Ngon Te Chai Lendo. Duwe Ne Kong Mem Min Nyu Bui Nya Tong Tuong. No Ko Kam Giak San San. Torab. Toi Dua Chak Ngon Te Len Gun Mat. Dui Ansang. Toi Te No Hong Fai Mo Hum. No Ko Mot Mao Doyent. Gyung Yu Bot Gach. Ngon Gok Shua No Dong Yu Latu Konki. No Long Dong Shuang To Mot Noi Nao Do. Toi Dung De. chia din dien thoai xuống sân nhà. Ở do, chen nhung tam van go ban thiêu, tôi cô đã nhìn thấy nổ. Không phải một lọ bùi đều, mà là một vết mồ, một con đuông bùi đồ mồ ảo, gần như không đã nhìn ra, đần ra khuy phong ăn. Trây thêm tôi bắt đầu đập men hẳn. Tôi không suy nghĩ. Tôi chỉ làm theo, tôi đi theo vết bùi. Nó đần tôi qua phong khách, qua nơi nhung đồ đập phụ vai trăng đừng nhung bong mà. Nó đần tôi ra hành lang, đến trăng khảo thẳng, nhung nó không đi lên. Nó rơi về phía một trăng qua mà tôi đã không để ý nhớ đần thuốc để. Trăng qua đang xoang tăng hầm. Trăng qua đang hề một khoang trong một gang tệ, mau trong ngôi tôi lăng đi. Tôi chắc chắn một trăm phần trăm răng trăng qua đồ đã duộc đồng chat. Tôi nhớ mình đã kiếm TRA nó khi môi đen. Thay nắm cho băng đồng cho khi vào một trái chót sát ghi set. Nó đã duộc đồng lại. Một lông không khi lên, một cho hewa ratu KHA ho. Mũi cho đặt go match và một tugi đồ hạc. Mũi cho su lăng quen. Chiang go đã phát ra today. Đột nhiên một ý nghĩ lôi lên trong đầu tôi. Đông chu trần tuông. Tôi quay phát lại, gần như chạy ngược lại vào phòng bếp. Tôi chịu đến lên bục tuông phía trần bon rùa, nói nhung con chu để hiền ra rô răng như vậy. Nó đã biến mặt. Bục tuông trong trần, chỉ còn lại lục dễ, đến tuông bong truck và vết ban đồ nuộc. Không có đầu vết nào chua đông chu en. Như đến nó chua bao nhiêu tuần tay. Chu ai đó đã lao nó đi. Hốc một thu gido. Tôi đông song hoi do gap. Hong. Nó không hi bien mat. Nó chỉ đi trien. Tôi quay trô lại hành lang đến trua cầm qua. Thăng hàm đăng hi mô. Tôi lấy hết khăn đam, tung mi ghê đề nhị khăn qua. Nó kêu lên một tiếng khót kết chu ọt và mô ra. Để lo một khảo thang go đọc đông đàn xuống bóng tôi. Vết bụi đồ tiếp thực đi xuống, biến mặt vào trong bóng đen. Tôi hit một hồi đạt sâu, không khi lên leo lem long ngột tôi đầu nhoi. Tôi buộc xuống bạc thang đầu tiên, go ren ri đuôi sức nâng chua tôi. Anh sang tôi đàn tôi cause bộ tôi cut một vòng tròn ri đuôi. Tôi đã oi tôi đàn việc so. Tôi đã hồi đạt pred what. Bộ tôi đạt pred what hồi đàn việc so what. Pred đàn việc so. Tôi đàn ho what. Tôi đàn việc so what. Tôi đã what. De o what hồi đàn việc co what. Tôi đàn việc so what. Abak tôi đàn việc. Am what ở bên cạnh. Khi tôi đàn việc. Tôi đàn việc. Một khai lành thao xuống bao trùm lại tôi đàn. Không khi ở đây đặc văn nàng. Mùi mốc nông nạc hồn. Anh đến tôi đàn. Nhung chiếc học gồ khu nát. Và một chiếc lò hồi không lò im lim ở góc phòng. Tôi chưa đàn về phía bục tuang đôi đàn chan khảo thang. Bục tuang nói tôi tiên răng tiên gồ đa phát ra. Và tôi nhìn thấy nô. Chung nhung con chủ đồ. Chung một kiều Việt thai run ray quạt ray con. Nhung lan nề. Chung không nhô bì vào mô nhạt. Chung không lô. Chung chiêm gan hit bục tuang. Môi chú gai cao đèn đạt lông tuổi. Khu koen. Và chung duộc Việt băng chinh tu bùi gạt đồ đồ. Đê đạc và song đông tren nen đã hầm lần leo. Như the idol đã đông cha hay thay. Cao vào những viên gach mach nat phía sau lốp và để Việt nen lôi cao shin tuyệt vong này. Tôi buộc tôi, như bị tôi miền. Sa nhà đinh nhọc đôi để dễ qua tôi đúng lại truộc bốc tuông, chỉ khát nhung con chu vài inch. Tôi có để nhìn tay kết cao qua lọc bụi, nhung hát nhỏ lý tì lắp lanh trong ánh sáng. Đây là ngon gọc. Đây là nói có bé giang ở. Tôi phải làm gì đó. Tôi phải phá vô bốc tuông này. Tôi can dung khu qua mình. Tôi can chia cha beng. Theo một sự tôi thắc không để giải thích, tôi vuông tay ra. Tôi cần phải chắc chắn. Tôi cần phải cầm nano. Các ngón tay tôi run reiki chẳng tiền lại gan chú si. Bí mà qua bục tung trong cô về lên. Cô anh khắc đồng ngón tay tôi chăm vào bùi hồ. The rap, Sam. Một tiếng nô vang đôi phía sau. Tôi khiến tôi ghét bàn ngồi. Hit lên một tiếng. Tôi quay phát lại. Khang quát thăng hàm đà đồng xâm lại. Tôi bị nhận chim trong bóng tôi. Anh sang đôi ngạt là tu chiếc điên tôi wooden rồi. Nó nằm ấp mát xuống sân bê tông. Chiếc mô vắng hào khoang yu ọt xuống khoan nô. Clack. Một tham kim lôi. Sắc lần và được hoạt vang lần tu phía qua. Tham qua một khai đàn sat năng về đuộc gai lại. Tu bên ngoài. Khong. Tôi hết lần. Lao về phía khăn qua. Toi mum trung bong toi, tied up vo mat go the rap. Kong, mochwara, toi nam lai tai nam tualang at va shuimang. No kong nuk nich. Toi dum vai huk val kwa. Motlan, hailan, no kung yuda. Toi dum val kong kwa, tuk dok ngan tai do nyoi. Nai, I do, mokwara, may keep. Toi hetchuden kiko hong toi, rat bong. Yang chiko tiang vang tua chin, toi dep lai trong kong jan no hep. Toi binot. Va roi toi nyan ra. Tiang go. Tiang go tu fia bok tuong de dung lai. Huan, tuan I am lang. So I am lang du kon dang so hon tiang go gap gap. No la so I am lang chua mo chay bay de sap. Chua mo chuok sanda kituk. Toi dung du, tho hon hen mo hoi lan chay rong rong tren long. Toi de sai. Toi de sai lam mo chay kong keep. De kong fai la mot loi kau ku. De la mo chay bai. Ling hong de wat tray kong ko gang jo tip. No dang de toi vau de. Toi lule kwe cheng chua. Va pei chin chamin vang angoi shung san de tong lan leo. Chek dien toi van nam kach do vai buok chan. An sang kwa no la tia hi vong doing at kwa toi. Toi fai lay no. Toi bo vifia no. Tai chan run ray. Toi chop lay no. But ngoi de vat shidang kap kan ham mot lan noa. Tim kiem mot loi tuat kak. Mot kwa so bat kutungi. Kong chogi. Chi kwa nyang bok tuong de va bong toi. Toi dong do. Lung ap vo bok tuong de lan. Hoi to tao tanyong dam may trang trong hong hi. Toi lang nghe. Tim toi dap ting ditch trong tai. Sao mot put dai nyu votan. Mot put I am lang nang ne. Mot am tang we bat dao. No kong den tu buk tuong ko dong chu. No den tu kan chua tang ham. Ngay fia so toi. Voit. Mot ting chao cham rai nang ne. Am tang kwa mot tu gido sak nyong va kong randang duok. Kio dok theo to go tu fia ben kia. Go zait. No kong fai la tien chao mong chua mot kong bat nyo. No ko trong luong. Ko chudik. Gong nyo do dang dung mot kai duk. Huak mot tan kim loi cham rai kio mot duong ran. So tren chang kua. Hate. Kate. Am tan do tip tak. Nyip nyang va kong ngungi. Mot am tan do dang lulung va di hua hen. No kong pai la am tan chua mot ngoi dang ko gang vo trong. No kala am tan ko mot ngoi dang cho tuo bit ho zang ngi du. Cho doi. Am tan kao se do dung lai dot mot nyu hi no bat dao. Chi kon lai ting tu hon hen ko toi. Vang fong trong kong jan yo hip. Mu hoi nyo jio tu tran shuang me mat keishi. Toi dung bat dong, long ep chat vau bok tuong da. Te van nam chat chik din twang yu mot tu vu ki vo dong. Toi gen troi dia trenjo. Bao lao. Toi kong biet. Mot put. Mot jo. Moi gai kio dai yu mot soi de dan chat chung. Chak cho du tung. Toi lang nghe. Tai tu dong nyoi vi ko gang. Kong chu gi. Kong mot tiang dong tu fia ben kia chan chua go. Hong tiang buok chan di. Bix aba. Hong tiang kot ket ku sanya. Như the bat ku tu yi da to ja tiang dong dong van dang nghe day. Chor doi. Cho bap doi ba dao ko root vi kang tang. Kong lang chua sanbe. Tong am quadige. Lan len tan shuang song. Cho hong toi korat. Toi kan fai di chuyen. Toi kong the dong day mai. Toi tu hang wai shuang we bit trensenya long van to val tuong. Toi chu den dien toi mot vong kwan kan ham la noa. Nyung chik hop. La hoi mang yen. Hong ko ye tai doi. Roy ang san yung lai chen bok tuong doi dien. Ku ge o un. Yung kon chu bang bui do van do. Mot loi buok toi sui kam. Ai ma lang fees. Mot kai bai don jian va hie kwa. Loi dong long tuong hai. Loi dong kam jiak toi loi kwa toi. Su che dong dong len trong ko hong nong hoi va chua loet. Kong fai kam jiak toi loi ve vu tai nan. Kong fai ve ko gai do. Lan ne, la su che dong vi su en jiu ngo kwa ching ming. Nier jio toi kwa. Pin din toi tu mo han chien sang mo vang. Toi tat man hing, chi bat din pin, tiet kim tung chut nang luong. Bong toi bao trum. Su I am lang de dak. Toi bat dao kam yen duok su met moi lan rak hap koda. Mi ma toi tru nang. Toi de chen of wei jek mu, kam bao moi dui den kinam tevi mang kwa mo. Nyung kwa de toi ku joy hang kwa no. Toi gut do wau jua he do gui, but tip di. Toi den devi mot am dang. Clack. Motam kim loi ko hok vang lent to fiatren. To var ra rang. Ma toi mo trong. Toi bat day. Wong chum sang run ray kwa dien toi ve fia kao thang. Cheng kua van dong. Nyung am than do la ting then sat. Ting den sat duok gora. Toi nin to, wads lang NGHE. Hongko ting buok chan. Hongko ting kuamo. Chiko sui em lang trolay. Mot loy moi. Hay mot ruchoy kak. Toi hong kwan tam. De la ko hoi chua toi. Toi buok vifia kao thang. Ko gang kong ge ra ting dong. Moi buok chan tren san betong dil ko kam jiak nang ne. Lo liu. Toi de tai lentai. Nam chua bang dong lan ngat. No van chung nyak. Toi de nye. Chen chua kong nyak nich. Toi tulai. Dung vai an vau. Vo each. Then satko de duok go. Nyung kwa van bi koa teo kats naudo. Toi leilai. Kam jiki vong va loilen datak ngam. Toi ding kwai di. Nyung roi mot ingi loilen. Toi du van tai nam kwa lan noa. Nyung lan nai toi kio no ve fia min de vi de ra. Kach. No mora. Hey ra mot ka ha hep. Cheng kwa tang ham ne mo val trong. Kong fai rangwai. Mot chi tiet nyonyat ma toi de quen ma trong kun huang lon. Toi den trong kio kan kwa morang hon. Du de lach ngoi kwa. Kong ki trong ham lang ko mui kak. Bot am mot. Nyung van chu ki va tu dong. Toi buakra kway tang ham. Hong dom kway de lay. Toi nying dong tan kwa lay so long. Hong wan gera ting dong. Toi dong trong ham lang ki sang. Viek dao tien toi lam la rut dien toi ra. Toi pai goi cho ai do. Chang sat. But kwa ai. Man hing sang len. Kong ko dich fu. Mot vak song tung kong ko. Me kip che ti tran ki ho ko gay nai. Toi lam bam. Gyong kandi. Su tuk jian lan at noi so trong mot huan kak. Toi pai roi hoi de. Kong pai ngay mai. Mala ngay bei gio. Levi. Lechia kwa shivadi. Toi se lai she cho den ki nyen de den hia kwa mo tram shang hai mot kwa hang ten loi nao do. Viva chia kwa ha kwa toi, chong fong wu, chen, chiek du jiao zuang. Toi koi ngoi, huang ve fia koi hang lang, noi koko tang dan len tang chen. Nyung toi zung lai. Toi biet kai nga nai. Toi da di lai trong no hai ngay nai, nyung ko gido hong dung. Hang lang duong yu day hon. Toi NHEO mat. An sang dui nat la tu chik dien toi kwa toi, no chichu sang duok mot kwang an fia truok. Buk tuong kway hang lang, noi ko kao tang, chong ko ve, ik ahon bing tuong, buk tran fang chan trio ben tai fai, mot buk tran retien ve mot bo bien, dhuma toi da di kwa hang chaklan, duong yu da lui, ik sa dem, vai met. Chakla do bong toi. Du kiet sak. Du tam tri toi dang choi ham toi. Toi tu nyo vai. Toi lek do. Ko geng xu adia to ko di chai kom jak ke kwak do. Chen trai. Roi chem fai. Toi bat do di. Sang ya tot ket due chen toi motam tang quin tuak ding kochu. Toi di kwa vi chirmadang labuk chang fai ado. Nyung no van ko ka toi mo doan. Toi kam tamo kon on lang chai dok song long. Kong lian kwan zideng yed do chong ya. Toi bat do di NHA and hon. Tieng boa chan kwa toi don da pon tren yung tam van goku. Ko tang van o xa. Kang kwa tru. A fia ben chai kwa chan kao tang. Van chi la mot kai bong mo a fia xi. No kong gan lai. Toi bat dao chai. Hoi tau kwa toi chon en gap gap. Long mut toi dao noi. Toi che het sak. Doi ge the tau kwa toi dap thing thich tren san go. An sang to chi dien toi chua toi nai. Len. Ve nyong vet sang dien chuang tren. Nyong bak tuong choge. Dan tuong bong trok. Toi. Chai. Nyong chan chua trok kong hi gan lai. Nong van a zo. Lo lung a koi mot hang lang zuong nyu không ko diem ket tak. Toi lot qua nyong canh của phòng ngu. Mot tua. Hai. Ba. Chung zong het no hat ai. Die san trong bong trok. Tai nam chua bong dong shin mao. Toi ko kam jiak min da chai qua chung roi. Chan qua nai. Toi da tai no roi. Kong. Chak la mot. Chan qua hat chung het. Hong lon bat dao dang lin. Trong qua hong toi. Mot kong qua dat lan leo. Toi kong het lin. Toi kong sup de het. Toi chi chai mot han dong wong yava tuyet fong. Dot yen. Toi dung lei. Chan toi nubi dong ding shuang san. Toi to hon hen. Chong te len dao goi. Toi quay lei. Hang lang fia sao toi. Noi ko keng ko tang ham, kung dai ramot, kek vô tan. No chim vào bóng tôi bị mắc kẹt, tôi giang ở rùa mốt, không gian không rất tồn tại. Không, tôi không chấp nhận điều này, đây phải là một gian mộ, tôi tu tan, man vào mắt mình. Cảm giác đau rát lan ra trên mặt tôi van ở đây. Trong hành lang này, bên chân tôi là một gian khoa phòng ngủ. Một trong những chân khoa dùng hết nhân qua mà tôi đã trải qua. Tôi không quan tâm nó đang đến đâu nữa. Tôi chỉ cần tốt khỏi chạy hành lang này. Tôi lao về phía nó. Tay nắm lấy tay nắm khoa lan liều. Tôi vẫn mạnh, nó mò ra. Tôi không buộc vào. Tôi ngã nhào vào trong, mắt thăng bằng vì tốc độ quá chân mình. Tôi lao vào bóng cô the vì vào không khí lan liều. Tôi ngã sắp mặt. San nhà không phải lago. Nó không vào lan. Một chú vì. Chăm man làm tôi trong vang. Mắt tôi lên. Một bề mắt thô rap. Uất. Bê tông. Muy qua dat va su muk nat shok vào muy tôi. Muy qua su lang quen. Tôi trong tôi. Tu tungang do len. Chăm sang tu chiếc điện tôi. Du tôi van nam chat trong tôi. Ket len phía truok. Nhung bốc toang do khăm kit. Một chiếc lo khoi khang lo. I am blim ở góc phòng. Nhung mang nhen đầy đắc nhu bong. Vá truok mặt thoại. Tren bốc tuang đôi điện. Là nhung con chu duok Việt bang bùi gach do. Tolon và rorang. Cu con. Tôi giang ở trong tang hầm. Một lần nữa, tôi quy tren san. Nhìn chăm chăm vào bốc tuang. Hoi to tôi đang ngung lại. Tim tôi không đập nữa. The joy subdu. Không cho hành lang vô tan. Không cho kiên trục bắt khát tiêu. Có một con duang. Một con duang đã duok vát xăm cho tôi. Mỗi buộc đi cho tôi. Mỗi quyết định cho tôi. Đều bị done that. Chai bay không chila kan ham. Tuan bunga nhà là một chai bay. Tuan has by the han chai. Trong một hành lang vô tan. Mỗi nhà chỉ đồn gia lada đàn tôi đi vong quanh. Qua nhung chênh chua và hành lang mà tôi không nhân ra. Dere đùa tôi trô lại điềm huat vạt. Nó đang trôi đùa với tôi. Nó đang đồn tôi. Đồn tôi về phía bốc tuồng này. Không phải linh hồn đùa chê đang nhà tôi ở đây. Không phải nó đang cao cú. Nó chỉ là cái mồi. Tiếng go, lôi chỉ thầm, nhung con chú. Thật khá chỉ là mồi nhiều. Tu thực sự đang sân đuôi tôi chính là ngôi nhà này. Nó mình tôi làm một việc. Nó mình tôi phụ bầu bốc tuồng đâu. Sam. Tiếng chua tăng hâm đồng sam lại phía trend thảo thang. Clack. Tiếng lên sat nâng nê đùa gai lại. Lên này, tôi không hit lên. Tôi không lâu về phía kênh qua. Tôi thầm chỉ không quay đầu lại nín. Tôi chỉ quay đầu. Trend sân về thang lang gồ, nín chăm chăm vào những con chú đồ. Sungak nhìn đập yên mà thì không lấy một sự thảo hiểu không kịp, lang leo. Tôi là một con chua trong một sai mà chung duok tít ke hoan hao. Và mà chung này chỉ có một lưỡi ra đuôi ngặt. Hoi en qua bốc tuồng đồ. Su em lang sao tiếng đến sát gai lây qua nang mi hong khá tiếng dong sam. Nó không phải là su vang mặt qua am than. Nó là một su hiền điên. Một thực lúc de lên mang ni qua tuệ. Đây không khi ra khoi phoi. Tuệ vang quy trend sam bê tông. Anh sang tu check điên tuệ chịu một vết đầy lên bốc tuồng đôi điên. Bao tron yung con chu mao đồ. Tu koen. Tuệ đã không chạy. Tuệ đã không là hate. Tuệ chỉ đồng gen là bị đến đi một phong. Troll wa đào không phải là một hành lang vô tan. Nó chỉ là một hành lang bình thường. Về khăn qua bình thường, và một tri ở kỳ sắc để đang bị đang lùa. Trong đã đàn tuổi đi một phong tron hoan hao. Một tuổi đam quan su bát lo qua chinh mình, và ta tuổi lại đang nơi trong muôn. Đi em bà đào. Su chay đang lên lôi trong miệng tuổi cô vì nhua shit qua quỷ. Không phải là nơi sâu. Nơi sâu là thu đàn cho có mỗi kino văn quan hy vọng chay tron. Đây là một đồ khắc. Một su chap nhan lang leo, gai gok. Tôi đã bị trôi sâu. Một khá chất trì ở đây. Tôi đúng đây. Đào goi tôi kêu răng rạc. Cô bắp ở lung và chan tôi đau nhục vì căng thẳng và vì cũng ngà. Tôi không nhìn về phía trao thăng nua. Chẳng qua đồ không còn liên quan. Nó không phải là một lối thoát. Nó chỉ là một phần của trái hộp. Tôi tu quay nguội, kết một phong anh sang yêu ọt qua điện thoại khắp khen ham. Anh sang luat qua nhung chiếc hộp các tông sung nua qua nhung duong ông reset trái đốc tròn mãi, nhà hàn điều bài, qua nhung tâm văn gồ mắc nà chát dòng ở một góc. Mắt tôi rằng tìm kiếm. Không phải một lối thoát. Một con thủ. Và tôi thay nào. Đua vào bức thong bên chan lô hôi, gan như bị chơ quạt bôi bong tôi, là một hình đăng đầy và nâng nề. Khen go some màu, đảo thép vuông vuk, một chế bùa ta. Bí bò lại, hai duộc đờ lại, dưa thì dưa được không quan trọng. Tôi buộc về phía nào, để yang yen nạ những màu bê tông vốn trần san, mỗi buộc đi qua tôi đều cô chủ đích. Su hoang lôn điên quang truộc đồ đỏ đông chung lấy thân một quay quyết tâm lên nhiều bằng trong lòng ngụt tôi. Duộc tôi. Tao hiểu rồi. Tôi nghĩ, du không nói ra lôi. Không phải là một câu hỏi. Là một lôi tôi yen bộ. Tôi chui xong và nắc chạy bùa lên, nó nông hông tôi nghĩ. Nông một catch trong tôi. Ken god to rap và nất nè, cô vào lòng bàn tay tôi. Đâu bùa bằng tệp đặc. Lăng ngát pu một lô bùi và giset mong. Tôi nằm chát no bằng ta hai te. Trong lòng tua no cô dat. No la một tua cô dat trong the joy dian ro nai. Một su dat bằng tape và go. Tôi quay lại đôi mắt với bọc tuang con young con chu. Duok tôi. Tôi thì tam gyung tôi vora vì không duok su dong. Me muan tao fa bọc tuang nai. Tao se fa no. Tôi nang che bua len kam yan suk nang kio kang ko vai. Tôi dat chan to. Ko da chuan bi cho mot ku vong. Chin luk do. Am tan but dao. Touch. 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 No fatra tu ben trong buk tuong ngay tuok ma toi. You ought. Run ray. Gan you do. No phong yung tien tao he dien ki uang tuok do. De la mo tien go. Mo tien go ko nyip dear, yung you mot duatri dang go ni vao tua pong mutua bominui. Mot kon rong ming tai dok song long toi. Nyung toi da gat no di. De la nui. De la le. Du. Mot loi kao shin. Mot su hak nyan. Roy mot am thang hak bad dao. No không phát ra từ bức tuồng trọc mặt, no đến từ môi nôi hắc. Tu nhung bức tuồng đã ben chăm tuệ. Tu tran ya phía tren, tu san betong đuôi chăm tuệ. Một tiền gam good trem vap. Một su rung dong. Look down, tuệ cam, they know you han la nghe they know. Một tan so đáp lên lo qua de ghi và shuang sang qua tuệ. No zong you tieng một ko mai hong lo vua du ok khoi zong ở zao dar rats xa. Nhung no dang lon dan len. Deu dan batamedan. Dai de doa. Hai am thang. Mot tieng gam gulan toa ap dao. Chang dang trang yang su chui qua toi. Mot tai bai ben trong mot tai bai. Lua chong qua toa da duot ding san to lao. Kill to dem ding meng trang kon duang kao to am ot dao. Drung noi qua ko gai trong dao toai. Tieng tet qua koai. Tôi loi la một la ban, và no lon chi về wang truck toi. Tôi phot lo tieng gam gu. Tôi qua cha tam trimming vào tieng do nhỏ bé. Do la tin here. Tieng gam rukia chila so nhỏ lon. La tieng o mang way nhà tao redingen tôi lay. No không muốn tôi giai to cho tu nyan quano. Tao din day. Tôi hitlen sắc man qua jong noi lam tôi ngak nyen. No vang vong kap kan ham. Doi choi lai voi tieng gam gu ngay một lon. Tao nghe they may. Chugo di, de dap lai tieng go tronen nha1 mo chut kan thiet hun. Touch tech. Toi vong ke buara sao don het suk lu qua min vao vai va long. Kida wad den diem chao ne trong fong chung chuano kong ki trong tang ham te doi. Kong fai tu. Mala ngay lup tech. Junior the aido de mo tuang chang kwa kwa mot nya hak tong yip. Mot kalam buot trong ab den, Hote toyam hoi konki, hoi lendatoy, toy the ramot hoi, vamot dam mai hoi nuok trung qua fut ratu mieng toy. Bisio songboy cham den qua chiek dien toy de transan. Boy transan ya shungkwan chan toy but do chien dong, kong fai bi jo toy, malatu hoi tran mot kach cham rai tan myung hing to one luan kidi. Toy hongkwan tam. Mat toy dan chafao mot diem tren buk tuong tach kautsuki, ngay ben duoi dong chudo. Tiengam gujo de la motam tan rungdong sausak, lamrung toy via vau nhau lap cap. Tiengonyo van kien tri mutnyip timu o jua kombao, toy don tat kavau kudap. Su jien du. Noi so. Su tuyet vong. Va tren het. Lakau ka dien kwang duok lam mut dieu dong dan. Du chimot lan. Tiengong dong tuan tua ozer, en tin tua alio alao toy, tup tomo. Kong ko ting tach kau votan gion gea. Kong ko ting gak fun roilata. Dolamot am fan tram duk. Am ort. Hu ko. Jong yu ting dap val mot ming dit lon, trao trong tu dong. Tru vi acham gan nu, lombat kai bua koi te toy, mot luk yat man. Dakva ko sukan che dakan go, lam teran kan te toy lenden tambavai. Toy lao dao lui lai mot buok, the hun hen. Tren buk tuong, noi dao bua vi avao, mot vet nat hing mangyan da huatien. Nyung no kong fai la mot vet nat ko han. Tu trong tam swano, tu nyung duang ran nat lan toara shong kwan, mo tu gido dang rira. Mo chat long. Sen set. Mao dan yu hak in. No chi shong wat kach cham chap. Gen yu loi bieng de lai nyung vet dai, bong rang tren be mat tuong trang ban. Mot jot roi shong san betong, woi mot tieng tom nyo am uat. Roi mot jot roi, nuat kam banyo var. Chung woi no la mot mui hoi. Mot mui hoi toi nong na kong jong bat ku tu gi toi tungwi. No kong fai mui kong ran hai hak chet dong bat don thuan. No la mui tua dat nye dia bishui lenso motren mua. Mui tua nyong hoi chet bao kwan da bifan hui. Mui tua sumotro koa duok nyam fong hang de kiva jio de duok jai fong. Toi dung chetren, king tom va huang mang. Che buat anang triu, trong tai toi. Trong mot kuan kach, mui am tang dingung lay. Cha chengo wa tiengam gu. Su I am lang dat ngut gan nu lam toi daik tai. Roy mot am tan kwe trelay, chi mot. Tiengam gu. No kong gon la mot, ting rang dong trem thap nua. No de tanglin. Sao hon. Chong huang hon. Va no kong kon mangve de doa. No mangve toa man. Jong ni mo ting renter kyo dai. Hai long fatra tu chingbo kong chuang we nya. No hong kon chin do voi toy, noa. No dong huan ngin handong chua toy. Tingo chua dua tre da bien matuan tuan. So I am lang tu diem do trong bok tuong jio de mang mot inya dang so. No hong fai lasu jai tuat. No lasu dat bai. Tuai run rei jio chik dien tuai len. Chiu thang cham sang vau vet nut. Chat long mau den van dang ri ra. Tau thang mot vung nyo tren sanya. Du oi eng sang trik tiept. Take the day bi mat kwa no bang long. Vada kwang. Va no dang chuyen dong. Kong fai teo chach kwa mot sing vat song. Ma? Lado nyung bang bang ki nyo liti dang tras. Dang tu try. Len tu ban trang. Vora tren be mat. Lam chovung chat long. Duong nyu ko jet nye. Mai lan mot bong bang vo. Mot lan hoi mong. Komui hoi. Toi lay toa ra. Toi da fa vo mo tu gi do. Nyong do kong fai la mot ngoi mo. Do la mot ke fong an. Tiengam guto man bao trum lay toi. Toi da kong gyai to chomot lin hon. Toi vo moi cho noan. The weight of the sledgehammer pulled my arm down. My hand went slack. It hit the concrete floor with a heavy, final thud, the handle bouncing once. I stared at the wall, at the black ooze weeping from the wound I'd made. The stink filled the back of my throat, a thick, greasy coat of old soil and chemicals. It was the smell of something that should have stayed buried. I took a step back. Then another. My boot crunched on a piece of fallen plaster. The sound was too loud in the sudden quiet. The house's deep, contented vibration had faded, leaving only the soft, wet plip, plip of the black fluid dripping onto the small, spreading puddle on the floor. Bubbles rose and popped on its slick surface, releasing little puffs of that foul air. What the fuck am I doing? Ugh. The question wasn't a thought. It was a physical sensation. A cold sickness churning in my stomach. This wasn't right. The pounding in my chest from moments before. The righteous fury. It all drained away, leaving me weak-kneed and shaky. I slid down the rough stone wall opposite the wound, my jeans scraping against the grit. I landed hard on the floor. The cold of the concrete seeped through the denim instantly. I looked at my hands. My right palm was grazed raw from the hammer's handle. Both were streaked with grime and dust. One finger had brushed against the weeping wall, and now a thick, black smear glistened on my knuckle. I stared at it, a mark of my work. The smell clung to my skin. I felt an urge to scrub it off, to scrape my own flesh clean. This wasn't salvation. This was desecration. I had been guided, manipulated, and now I was a vandal in a tomb, breaking things I didn't understand. The child's desperate tapping. Had I silenced it for good? The thought was a shard of ice in my gut. I had failed. Again. In the dead air, a new sound formed. It was not in the wall. It was not in the room. It was beside my ear. A whisper. So close I felt a phantom puff of breath against my skin. It was the voice of a child, impossibly clear, stripped of any echo. It wasn't a plea. It was a warning. Don't. The word was a thread of sound, thin and brittle with terror. I flinched so hard my head hit the stone wall behind me. A dull throb of pain radiated from the back of my skull. I scrambled away, crab walking backward on the filthy floor, my eyes wide, scanning the empty space beside me. Nothing. There was nothing there, just dust motes dancing in the beam of my phone's light. The air was cold and still. But I heard it. I fucking heard it. And just as the last vibration of that terrified whisper faded, another voice rose to take its place. This one came from everywhere at once. It wasn't a whisper in my ear. It was a resonance in the bones of the cellar, in the air I was breathing. It was a woman's voice. A familiar voice that twisted my insides into a knot of cold dread. The voice from the accident. The voice I heard every time I closed my eyes. Save it, Ethan. My breath hitched. My eyes darted around the cellar, from the weeping wall to the rusted boiler to the dark, shadowed corners. The voice was smooth, persuasive, laced with a terrible, knowing disappointment. It curled around the child's simple, panicked warning and smothered it. Don't fail again. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't my guilt playing tricks. This was a direct, calculated assault. The house was talking to me. It had found the rawest nerve in my soul and was pressing down, hard. It was pitting her ghost against the ghost of the child. It was turning my one desperate need, to atone, into the very weapon that would seal my fate. The child was afraid of what I was doing. She was disappointed I might stop. A choice. A test. A wave of hot, blind rage washed over me, burning away the cold fear. I was not a puppet. I would not be plagued by the echoes in this goddamn house. The child's voice was fear. Her voice was failure. The tapping, the letters, the pleas. They were for the child. The house was the cage, and its groaning and tricks were the bars. I had to break the cage. I couldn't stop halfway. No! I snarled at the empty room, at the voice of my own damnation. I scrambled to my feet, my legs unsteady. Not again! I lunged for the sledgehammer, my hand closing around the splintered wood of the handle. Its weight was a comfort now. A purpose. I ignored the memory of the faint, terrified whisper by my ear. I erased it. It was a trick. A trick to make me hesitate. A trick to make me fail. I faced the wall. The black fluid was still dripping, a slow and steady pulse. The hole I'd made seemed to watch me, a single dark eye. Kukon! Help the child. I raised the hammer high over my head, my muscles screaming in protest. I roared, a sound torn from my lungs that was part fury, part despair. I swung. Crack. A large piece of plaster and the fibrous, dark material behind it exploded inward. The sound was sharp and final. I swung again. Crunch. Another chunk flew into the darkness beyond. Plaster dust filled the air, thick and chalky, catching in the beam of my phone light. Again. My arms burned. My back ached. The wall crumbled under the assault. I was a machine of destruction, fueled by guilt. With every blow, I wasn't just breaking down a wall. I was trying to smash the image of a wrecked car, shatter the memory of a voice cut short. Hit. A spiderweb of cracks raced across the remaining surface. Hit. Through the chaos of my own grunts and the splintering of the wall, I heard it. One final sound from within the darkness I was creating. It was a shriek. A small, thin, piercing sound of pure terror, like a small animal caught in a trap. It didn't echo. It was just there, and then it was gone, swallowed by the noise of my next blow. I faltered for a second. The hammer wavered in the air. Don't fail again. The house's whisper, or her whisper, or my whisper, drove me on. I let out another yell and put everything I had left into one last, desperate swing. The hammer connected with the center of the damaged section. The entire structure gave way with a deep, grinding groan. A huge section of the wall collapsed inward, vanishing into the hole I had made. It didn't clatter. It fell with a soft, final thump, like a body being dropped onto a dirt floor. And then, silence. A profound, suffocating silence. The house's groaning was gone. The whispers were gone. My own ragged breathing was the only sound in the universe. I stood there, panting, leaning on the sledgehammer, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. I had done it. I raised my phone. The beam cut through the thick dust cloud. There was a hole in the wall now, roughly the size of a doorway. I stepped closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. I peered inside. There was nothing. No child's skeleton huddled in a forgotten crypt. No ghostly light. No sign of a long-imprisoned soul finally set free. There was only darkness. An ancient, undisturbed darkness that seemed to drink the light from my phone. A solid, tangible black. And from that opening, a current of air flowed out. It wasn't a gust. It was a slow, steady exhalation, as if the house itself were breathing out after holding its breath for a very, very long time. The air was frigid, a damp cellar cold that clung to my skin and made the sweat on my back feel like ice. And it carried that smell, that deep, foul smell of rot and earth and corrupted preservation, but 100 times stronger, flooding the small cellar, a physical presence that made me gag. I stared into that void, my moment of triumph curdling into a new, dawning horror. The silence wasn't peace, it was completion. The child's shriek wasn't one of release. It was a final, failed warning. I hadn't broken a prison. I had broken the lock on the cage door from the outside. Behind me, from the top of the concrete stairs, came a sound. It was not a slam. It was not a bang. It was a soft, deliberate click. The unmistakable sound of the basement door, the one I had left wide open, swinging shut on its frame until the latch engaged. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I was no longer a visitor. I was a resident. Then a new sound began. A soft tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't coming from the hole in front of me. It was coming from the stone wall to my left, then from the wall to my right, from the concrete stairs behind me, from the ceiling above, from the floor beneath my feet. From every surface all at once, a chorus of faint, patient taps began, enclosing me in a cage of sound. The house was awake, and it was hungry, and I understood, in that final, sickening moment, that the next frantic sounds of desperation it heard would be my own. My arms trembled. The sledgehammer felt like it was fused to my hands. The wood sticky with sweat and grime. Dust hung in the air, a thick, gritty fog that caught in my throat and made each breath a dry rasp. The beam of my phone's light cut a weak tunnel through the airborne particles, illuminating the raw, black maw I had torn in the cellar wall. It was done. But there was no sense of release. No catharsis. Just a ringing in my ears and the hollow ache of spent adrenaline. The deep, structural groan of the house was gone. The whispers were gone. The silence that rushed in to fill the void wasn't peaceful. It was predatory. It was the held breath of a hunter, watching its prey realize the trap has sprung. I leaned on the hammer, my chest heaving. My gaze was fixed on the opening. A doorway to nothing. A solid, light-devouring blackness. The cold air that bled from it was a physical thing, wrapping around my bare arms, raising goosebumps. It smelled of damp soil, of things left to rot in the dark for a century, of decay. I took a shaky step forward, then another. The floor grated under my boots. Are you there? I whispered. The sound was pathetic, swallowed instantly by the oppressive quiet. The boy? Of course there was no answer. My own voice sounded alien. I was a fool. A man talking to a hole in a wall. I had let this place, this thing, twist my guilt into a weapon, and point it at myself. The child's final, piercing shriek echoed in my memory. It wasn't a sound of freedom. It was terror, the sound of his last defense being shattered by the very man he was trying to warn. I lowered my phone, the light dipping towards the floor. And that's when I heard it, clink, clatter, skitter. A small, metallic sound from just inside the dark opening. My head snapped up. My blood ran cold. I held my breath. Every muscle in my body tensed. Something rolled out of the blackness, tumbling across the dusty concrete and coming to a stop near the toe of my left boot. The light from my phone found it. My car keys. The small silver fob. The key to my ignition. The key to the house I had just left behind. The ones that had vanished from the kitchen counter 3 days ago. They hadn't fallen. They were thrown. Tossed with just enough force to roll to my feet. A deliberate act. A sick dread, cold and heavy, began to pool in my stomach. This wasn't a haunting. This was a game. My eyes were glued to the hole. I didn't dare look away. My mind raced, trying to jam pieces together that shouldn't fit. The whispers in her voice. The moving objects. It wasn't a ghost trying to communicate. It was an intelligence. A plan. Thump. Scrape. Thump. Another object emerged from the darkness. It didn't roll as far. It was heavier. I slowly moved the beam of light over to it. It was the little red toy car. The one from the accident. The one I saw in my nightmares. Its plastic wheels still spinning on the asphalt. The one I thought I'd seen on the mantelpiece. A hallucination born of a guilty mind. But it was real. It was here. Covered in a fine layer of grime and cellar dust. It had been inside that wall. They had put it there. They had put it there for me to find. The realization hit me like a physical blow. A sudden, gut-wrenching clarity that made my knees feel weak. The tapping. The child's terrified whispers. Help me. It was never a plea to be let out. It was a warning to keep something in. I was the mark. My grief was the key. And I had just unlocked the door. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my mouth, the hammer falling from my other hand and clattering on the floor. I turned, my eyes wide with a new, frantic panic, and looked up the concrete stairs toward the sliver of light from the kitchen. My only way out. Click. The sound was sharp, metallic, and final. It came from the top of the stairs. From the basement door. The door I had left wide open. It hadn't slammed. It had been closed deliberately, the latch perfectly engaging with the frame. My heart stopped. For a second there was only the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. Then came another sound. Thump. A heavy, thick noise. The sound of a deadbolt. A new one that wasn't there before. Slide. Chunk. Another. Lower down on the door. A heavy bar sliding into a bracket. I stared up at the darkness where the doorway had been. I was not a guest. I was not a renovator. I was an ingredient. I had been lured into the cage, and now the keepers were locking it from the outside. I spun back to face the hole in the wall, my mind a blank slate of pure animal terror. The smell from within seemed to intensify, a wave of rot and cold earth that was so thick I could almost taste it. Then the sound began again. Tap. A single, soft tap. It came from the stone wall to my left. My head whipped toward it. Tap! Tap! From the wall on my right. I flinched, spinning in place. Tap! From the low ceiling, directly above my head. Tap! From the concrete floor beneath my feet. I could feel the faint vibration through the soles of my boots. They were all around me. A slow, patient, curious tapping. It wasn't a code. It wasn't a plea. It was an assessment. A predator's prodding. A spider lightly touching the threads of its web to find out where the fly was trapped. Panic shattered my paralysis. I let out a choked sound and lunged for the stairs, scrambling on all fours like an animal. My hands slapped against the rough, cold concrete steps. I had to get to the door. I had to try. The tapping stopped. All at once. The sudden silence was somehow worse. I froze mid-step, my ears straining. Thump! It wasn't a tap anymore. It was a blow. A deep, solid impact against the wall behind me. Thump! From the wall to my left. The entire structure seemed to shudder. Thump! 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 From all sides at once. The floor, the ceiling, the walls. A coordinated rhythmic pounding began. A gigantic, monstrous heartbeat, enclosing me in its percussive cage. It was in my bones, in my teeth. The air vibrated with it. The very foundations of the house had come alive with a violent, unified purpose. I screamed. A raw, ragged tear of a sound. I scrambled up the remaining steps and threw myself at the door. I grabbed the cold metal knob and twisted. Nothing. It wouldn't budge. I slammed my shoulder against the wood. It was like hitting a wall of solid rock. I beat on it with my fists, the sound of my own desperate blows completely lost in the deafening rhythmic backquote, thump, 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 backquote of the house. "Let me out!" I shrieked, my throat raw. "Please!" The pounding intensified, faster now, a maddening, inescapable drumbeat driving me insane. Dust rained down from the ceiling, shaking loose from the mortar between the stones. The bare bulb hanging from a wire in the center of the room flickered violently with each impact, casting the cellar in a strobe of light and shadow. In one of the flashes of light, I saw the wall I had broken. The solid blackness within the hole seemed to move, to ripple like heat haze off asphalt, but it was cold. Defeated, I slid down the door, my body racked with tremors. I curled into a ball on the top step, covering my head with my arms as if that could somehow block out the sound. The pounding was inside my skull. It was the only thing left in the universe. It was the sound of my own tomb being sealed. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pounding stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, complete. I stayed curled up for a long moment, shaking uncontrollably, my ragged breaths echoing in the small space. My knuckles were bleeding. My shoulder throbbed. Slowly, carefully, I lowered my arms. I pushed myself up, my back scraping against the rough wood of the door. I turned to face the cellar. The bare bulb had stopped flickering. It cast a steady, sickly yellow light over the scene. The dust was beginning to settle. I looked at the hole in the wall, the one I had made, and out of the absolute, solid blackness within, two small points of light ignited. They were not bright. They were a dull, faint red, like the dying embers of a fire. They were spaced several inches apart, and they did not blink. They just were, watching me. They were low to the ground, maybe 3 feet up from the floor, the height of a kneeling man. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could only stare at those two steady, red lights in the dark. A voice spoke. It wasn't a whisper in my ear. It wasn't the voice of my past. It was a new voice. It was low, calm, and conversational. It seemed to come from the very air around me, a dry, rasping sound that vibrated from the stones and the dirt. It was real, human, and it said one word. Welcome. My legs buckled. There was no thought, just a failure of nerves and muscle. I fell backward, my hip and elbow cracking hard against the concrete floor. The pain was a distant firework, lost against the supernova of the voice and the 2 red embers burning in the hole. I scrambled away, crab walking backward, my boots kicking up dust, my palms scraping on the gritty surface. The word echoed, not in the air but inside the bones of my skull. Welcome. A host greeting a guest. A warden greeting a prisoner. My mouth opened. My jaw worked, my throat contracted, a taut knot of muscle straining to produce a sound. Nothing came out. Not a whimper. Not a gasp. The mechanism was broken. I was a bell with a stolen clapper, shaking uselessly in the dark. I pushed myself against the far wall, the one opposite the hole I had made. The rough, cold stone was an anchor in a world that had come unmoored. My eyes were locked on the 2 red lights. They didn't move. They didn't blink. They simply watched, patient and ancient. The cellar felt smaller. It wasn't my imagination. The corners seemed to bleed into shadow. The perspective warping. The low ceiling pressing down with a physical weight. The air was getting heavy, hard to draw into my lungs. Then I saw it. On the wall beside me. A slight bulge in the plaster, near my shoulder. It was subtle, like a pocket of air trapped behind old wallpaper. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process the information. The bulge grew. It stretched the beige, water-stained surface. Slowly, with an obscene organic patience, a shape began to push through from the other side. It was a cheekbone. High and sharp, pressing the plaster outward until fine, spidery cracks radiated from the point of pressure. Below it, Another shape formed, the curve of a jaw. Then another. A mouth, stretched wide in a scream that made no sound, the plaster cracking along the line of the lips. The dust, disturbed by the movement, sifted down onto my shoulder. My head whipped to the other side. It was happening there too. Another face, this one rounder, a woman's perhaps, emerging from the stone and mortar. Her eyes were deep hollows, her form distorted as if viewed through thick, warped glass. She was one with the wall, an eternal bas-relief of her final moment. My gaze swept the cellar. They were everywhere, pushing out from the foundations. A man with a thick mustache, his face half-formed, a scream tearing his plaster skin. A child, small and indistinct. Just a suggestion of a terrified face near the floor. A family, huddled together, their features merging into a single, agonized sculpture of despair. An entire gallery of silent anguish, their prison and their tombstone being the very structure of the house. One face was clearer than the others. A man in his 40s, his hair slicked back, his plaster jaw set in a rictus of terror. I knew him. I had seen his photograph on a yellowed missing person flyer tacked to the board at the town's general store. Daniel Miller. Last seen entering the Blackwood property. 1978. He wasn't missing. He was here. He was part of the collection. The red embers in the hole finally moved. They drifted forward, out of the maw I had created. They were not attached to a body. They were free-floating, burning points in the darkness. The voice did not speak again. It didn't need to. From the hole, something else began to emerge. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't smoke. It was a fluid, a substance as black as pitch. It spilled out onto the concrete floor like a slow, thick oil leak. It didn't hiss or bubble. It moved with a silent, deliberate purpose, a creeping tide of pure black. I watched, frozen, as the leading edge of it touched the wall where the family was screaming their silent screams. It didn't splash against the stone. It flowed up it. As the black fluid covered the bulging plaster faces, they vanished, not erased. Absorbed. The bulges smoothed out, the cracks sealed themselves. The plaster becoming flat and featureless once more, now coated in a slick, wet-looking black film. The substance was not destroying the evidence. It was tidying up. It was resetting the trap. It was preparing the wall for a new exhibit. For me. The sight broke my paralysis. No. A choked whisper finally escaped my throat. It was thin and reedy. I had to get out. The stairs. The door was locked, but I had to try. I had to get away from the floor. Away from the encroaching black tide. I turned and lunged for the base of the staircase, crawling on my hands and knees, my only thought a frantic repeating mantra. Stairs. Door. Stairs. Door. The black substance was spreading faster now, a flowing, geographic stain that consumed the dusty concrete. It was 10 feet away. Then, 5. My hand reached the bottom step. Cold, solid concrete. I hauled myself up onto it. My left hand went to the second step to pull myself forward. It sank. My brain stalled. The sensation was impossible. The concrete, a moment ago hard and unyielding, felt soft. Pliable. Like cold, thick clay. I looked down. The step was sagging under the pressure of my hand. It was losing its shape, the sharp 90-degree angle of its edge drooping like melting ice cream. Another glob of concrete, like a thick tear, dripped from the underside of the step above and landed with a soft, wet plop on the one I was on. The entire staircase was dissolving. The steps were flowing into one another, the structure liquefying into a smooth, steep ramp of gray slush. It was no longer a staircase. It was a slide, leading down into the dark. Panic tore a real sound for me this time, a high, thin wail. I tried to find a handhold, a foothold, but there was nothing. My boots slipped on the viscous, shifting surface. I started to slide backward, down, toward the black fluid that now covered almost the entire cellar floor. My right boot slid off the bottom of the melting ramp and touched the blackness. I felt nothing. No cold, no heat, no pain, no sensation at all. It was as if my foot had simply ceased to exist. I looked down. My boot was covered in the slick black substance. I tried to wiggle my toes. The command left my brain, but the signal never arrived. There was no response. There was just nothing. A disconnect. And then, a piece of my mind vanished. The memory of the girl. The one from the accident. The red dress. The sound of the impact. The guilt that had been the sun my entire world revolved around for 2 years. It was just gone. I knew there had been a reason for my guilt, a shape in my mind where the memory used to be, but the details were wiped clean. Like a tape that had been recorded over. I felt a flicker of confusion. Why was I here? The cold terror that answered the question was immediate. But the reason for it, the inciting incident, was now a blank spot. The house wasn't just going to kill me. It was eating me. It was consuming my history, my pain, my very identity, digesting it as fuel. I screamed and threw myself sideways, off the melting stairs, landing with a grunt on the small patch of clear concrete near the foundation wall. I scrambled up, my back pressed to the stone. My right leg felt strange, numb and distant. I held up my hands in front of my face, my breath coming in ragged, terrified sobs. I looked at my left hand, the one that had sunk into the concrete. It was fading. I could see the rough gray texture of the stone wall behind it, a faint, ghostly image visible through my palm. The lines of my life, my fate, were dissolving. My fingers were becoming transparent, the knuckles blurring, the skin turning to smoked glass. The process was slow, methodical. I was being unwritten. The 2 red embers drifted closer, hovering in the air before me, about 6 feet away. They watched the process with an air of detached curiosity. The black fluid on the floor stopped spreading, its hunger momentarily sated by the taste it had been given. I looked from my disappearing hand to the wall where the faces had been. I was no longer an inhabitant. I was becoming an installation. My terror would be baked into the plaster. My silent scream would be a bulge in the wall for the next victim to touch. My guilt, already harvested, would be the key to unlock their own. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, the strange nothingness of my right leg, a constant reminder of the encroaching void. I couldn't fight. The architecture of my prison was the body of my captor. The very air was its breath. I finally understood. The child's whispers, "Help me," were never for him. They were for me. He wasn't trapped in the walls. He was the walls. He was the whispered warning, the last fading echo of a soul already digested. His final act, an attempt to warn the next meal. An attempt I had mistaken for a plea. I lifted my fading left hand, and did the only thing left to do. I placed my palm flat against the cold stone of the wall. And with the last vestiges of my physical self I began to tap. Tap, tap, tap. A new warning. For whoever came next. A new voice in the chorus of the damned. The red light seemed to brighten, just for a second. It looked like satisfaction. The tapping stopped. The feeling of my hand against stone was gone. The cold of the cellar floor was gone. The thin, watery feeling of my own dissolving body snapped back into solidity, a painful rush of pins and needles that made me gasp. The air that filled my lungs was not the damp, earthy air of the foundation. It smelled of dust and old furniture polish. I was on my feet. My shoes were on the floor. A wooden floor. Polished hardwood with a faded floral rug laid over the center. I was standing in the living room, my head turned, a mechanical motion. The couch was there, its springs still sagging from where I'd sat days, or a lifetime, ago. The crooked lampshade. The fireplace, its grate empty and black. My hand, the left one, rose in front of my face. It was solid. 5 fingers, knuckles, faint scars. Not transparent. Not smoke. I ran to the front door. My hand closed around the brass knob. I twisted. It turned. The mechanism inside clicked, but the door didn't open. I pulled. It was sealed shut, as if the wood had fused with the frame. I slammed my shoulder into it. The impact sent a shock of pain up my arm, but the door didn't budge. It was like hitting a wall of solid rock. The window. I lurched across the room to the large bay window that looked out over the front lawn. My fingers fumbled with the lock, broke a nail, but it finally turned. I pushed up on the sash. It didn't move. I put my palms flat against the pane and pushed with all my weight. Nothing. I stared outside. There was no lawn, no dirt road, no tree line. There was only gray. A flat, featureless, unending curtain of gray. It wasn't fog. Fog moves. It has depth. This was a solid color, pressed directly against the glass. It was like the house had been picked up and dropped inside a box with gray walls. My breathing was fast. A series of short, sharp pants. I turned my back on the window, pressing against the wall beside it. I was a prisoner. The cellar was just the dungeon. This was the cell. That's when I heard it. Tap. 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 The sound was faint, but familiar. A desperate, rhythmic sound. My eyes darted around the room, to the walls, the ceiling, but the sound wasn't coming from the walls. It felt closer. Much closer. I put a hand to my chest to feel my own hammering heart, and I felt it. Underneath the frantic, panicked beat of my own pulse, there was another rhythm. A vibration. A small but distinct, knocking sensation coming from inside my own ribcage. Tap. 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 It was me. My hands were balled into fists at my sides. My mouth was hanging open. I wasn't doing it. I wasn't moving. But the tapping was coming from me. A muscle I didn't control, deep inside my chest, was spasming in a perfect 3-beat rhythm. A phantom limb, buried in my own flesh, was knocking on the inside of my bones, trying to get out. Or trying to call someone in. I tried to scream. The thought was there. A raw, piercing sound of pure terror. I drew a breath, my throat opened, my jaws strained. A noise came out. But it wasn't a scream. Help me. The voice was a whisper. It was my voice. I recognized the pitch, the exact inflection of fear. It was the same whisper I had given in the cellar, a sound of choked surrender. The words came out of my mouth, but I didn't form them. My lungs pushed the air, my vocal cords shaped it, my tongue moved against my teeth, all without my permission. I was a spectator in my own body. No, I tried to say. My own thought, my own will. Help me, my mouth whispered again, a perfect, automated repetition. I clamped my hands over my mouth. The flesh of my lips moved against my palms, trying to form the words again. The muscles in my jaw worked against the pressure. The tapping continued in my chest, a steady, patient metronome. Tap, tap, tap. I was the lure, the thing on the end of the hook. My own captured terror, now weaponized and played on a loop to attract the next soul. The house had not just eaten my guilt, it had hollowed me out and was now wearing my body like a suit, turning me into one of its tools. I stumbled back, away from the gray void of the window, and my leg hit something hard. I looked down. The television. A big, old cathode ray tube model that had come with the house. Its screen, a dark, convex mirror. I stared into it, my breath fogging a small patch on the glass. My reflection stared back. It was me. Pale face, wild eyes, hands clamped over my mouth. I saw the fear. I saw the shape of my own horror etched onto my features. I held my breath. I stood perfectly still, concentrating all my will on one command. Stop. Stop the tapping. Stop the whispering. In the reflection, my hands lowered slowly from my face. My own hands remained pressed hard against my mouth. In the screen, my reflection looked down at its chest, then back up at me. It offered a small, slow smile. It was not my smile. My facial muscles never moved. This smile was different. It pulled the corners of the mouth up too high, creating deep, unnatural creases beside the nose. It was a performer's smile, a predator's smile. The tapping in my chest stopped. For a moment, relief. A clean, sharp intake of breath. Then I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the television. I looked at the reflection. Its left hand was raised. Its index finger was tapping against the inside of the screen. The sound was clear, a sharp little tick against glass, perfectly in time with the phantom rhythm that had just been inside me. It tapped 3 times, paused, then tapped again. Its eyes, my eyes, never left mine. They were filled with a cold, knowing amusement. I backed away from the television. 1 step. 2 steps. My reflection stayed where it was, a figure trapped behind the glass, its finger continuing its silent, steady drumming. It was showing me what I was. A performance. A recorded loop of a man's final moments. It was mocking me with the truth. The smile on its face widened. It looked pleased. I tore my eyes away, spinning around, my back to the screen. I could still hear the faint tick, tick, tick behind me. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, trying to block everything out. The gray window, the mocking reflection, the house itself. Get out of my head, I ground out through my teeth. The words were mine this time, gritty and real. Help me, my mouth whispered back instantly. A soft counterpoint to my own rage. I let out a raw, guttural noise of frustration and slammed my fist into the wall. Pain shot up to my elbow. The plaster was hard and unyielding. And then I heard another sound. It was not the tapping from the television. It was not the whisper from my own lips. It was new. Or, horribly, it was old. It was coming from the wall my fist was resting against. It was very small, very weak. A scratching sound, like a mouse behind the lath. It was followed by a tap. Faint, fragile. The tap of a small bone, a child's knuckle against plasterboard. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, tired, but persistent. I pulled my hand back from the wall as if it were hot. I leaned in, pressing my ear against the spot. The wallpaper was cool and slightly rough. I held my breath, listening past the frantic drumming of my own blood. Scratch, tap, tap. It was there. The real thing. The source code for my own damnation. The child. The one I thought I was saving. The one who had tried to warn me. He was still here. His consciousness hadn't been fully digested. Not like the others in the cellar. Maybe he was too young, too innocent. Maybe his signal was too pure. Or maybe the house just liked to keep him. The original bait. The first note in its dreadful symphony. I hadn't freed him. I hadn't silenced his pain. I had just moved into the cell next to his. His desperate tapping was no longer a warning meant for me. It was a greeting. A recognition of a new neighbor. We were a chorus now. His faint, desperate scratching from inside the walls, and my own body's involuntary hellish mimicry. I slid down the wall to the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees. I looked across the room at the black, silent screen of the television. I couldn't see the reflection from this angle, but I could still hear it. Tick, tick, tick. And from the wall beside me, the soft, patient reply. Tap, tap. I closed my eyes. There was nothing left to do. I just listened to the duet. The new voice and the old, playing their song in the belly of the beast, waiting for the next guest to arrive. The sound came from a world I thought I had left behind. The crunch of tires on a gravel drive. Slow and uncertain. The engine cut, and the silence that rushed in afterward was deeper than before. I did not move. My body, a statue of petrified flesh in the center of the living room, remained still. My ears, now instruments of the house, strained to decipher the new noise. A car door opened. A light, hesitant sound. Then it closed, softer still. Footsteps on the overgrown path. Not heavy like a man's. Lighter, quicker. The shuffle of sneakers on dirt and dead leaves. A key sliding into a lock. My lock. The front door lock. It was a sound I had not heard from the outside. Time had become a thick, useless fluid since the house had taken me. Days. Weeks. I had no way to measure. The gray void outside the windows never changed. My own body, a hijacked vessel, had fallen into a sickening rhythm. The whisper. The tapping in my chest, a muscle memory of terror that the house could now play at will. The duet with the scratching boy in the walls. We were the house's song. And now, someone was at the door. Someone was about to hear us. I tried to scream a warning. Run. The thought was a white-hot spike in my mind. My throat was a locked gate. The house held the key. It wanted this. It needed this. My jaw tightened, but my lips remained sealed. The phantom tapping inside my ribs started up, a slow, deliberate beat of anticipation. Tap. 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 A drum call for the feast to come. I heard the tumblers in the old lock turn. A grating, metallic complaint. The door creaked open. A shaft of real light, dusty and yellow with late afternoon sun, cut across the floor. It was the most beautiful and horrifying thing I had ever seen. It brought with it the smell of pine and damp earth, the smell of freedom. A silhouette stood in the doorway, small against the brilliance. A woman. She stepped inside. Her name was Maya. I did not know this, not then. To me, she was just a shape, a scent of the outside world, a life about to be extinguished. She was looking for a place to disappear, a cheap rental, far from the city, far from a man whose fists had become a familiar language. She saw an old, forgotten house, and thought it was a shelter. She thought the peeling paint and boarded-up back windows meant privacy. She thought the silence was a promise. She hesitated on the threshold, her hand still on the doorknob. She squinted into the gloom of the foyer. Her eyes passed right over me, standing motionless in the adjoining living room, a piece of furniture she hadn't registered yet. She took another step inside, letting the door swing from her grasp. It closed behind her. It wasn't a gentle click. It was a solid, heavy boom that echoed through the entire structure. A sound of finality. It was the sound of a vault being sealed. The last sliver of daylight vanished. Dust motes, disturbed by the concussion, danced in the air. She jumped, a sharp intake of breath. She spun around and grabbed the brass knob. She twisted. It didn't turn. She jiggled it. Nothing. The metal was cold and unmoving in her hand. Shit, she muttered. The word was a small, fragile thing in the vast silence. She leaned closer, her face inches from the wood. She examined the lock mechanism. I could see the line of her back, the tension in her shoulders. She was still in the realm of rational problems. Bad lock. Old house. A simple, frustrating inconvenience. She saw the heavy iron deadbolt above the knob, the one I had never touched. It was a thick, black bar of metal, set in a heavy bracket. It was already thrown. It had been thrown the entire time. She hadn't needed to lock it. It was already locked. She put her shoulder to the door and pushed. The old wood groaned but did not give. She pushed again, harder, her sneakers slipping on the dusty floorboards. The door was as solid as the foundation. Panic began to fray the edges of her frustration. Her breathing quickened. Okay, she said to herself, her voice a low whisper. Okay. She was trying to control the fear, to not let it take her. She turned her back on the door and faced the darkness of the house. Her eyes scanned the foyer, the grand, rotting staircase that went up into shadow, the wide archway that led to the living room where I stood. Her eyes found me. They widened, just for a second. A flicker of surprise. She saw a man, standing perfectly still in the dark. A pale face. Wild eyes. She opened her mouth to speak. To ask who I was. To ask what I was doing here. The house did not let her. It spoke first, using my mouth. The whisper came out of me, an automated breath of despair. It wasn't my will. It was a recording, the house playing its favorite track. Help me. The words slid through the air between us. They were not loud, but they landed with the force of a physical blow. She froze. Her hand, which had started to rise, dropped to her side. I saw the calculation in her eyes turn to pure, animal fear. This was not a real estate agent, not a squatter. The tone of my voice, The hollow and broken sound of it told her everything she needed to know. This was wrong. "Who's there?" she asked. Her voice shook. It was a stupid question. She could see me. But she needed to hear a normal reply. She needed to anchor this moment in reality. The house didn't give her one. It held me silent, a living scarecrow. The only sound was the frantic pounding of her own heart, a sound I could almost hear across the room. She took a half step back, her body pressing against the unyielding front door. She was trapped between it and me. Her eyes darted around, looking for a weapon, an escape. A heavy-looking umbrella in a stand by the door. A window at the far end of the living room, its glass covered in a thick film of grime. She chose the window. It was farther away, but it was a chance. She began to sidle along the wall, her back scraping against the faded, tearing wallpaper. She never took her eyes off me. I remained motionless. My body was a cage, and I could only watch through the bars as the new mouse began to navigate the maze. "Stay back," she warned, her voice gaining a sharp edge of desperation. "I swear to God, don't you come near me." I didn't move. I couldn't. She was halfway across the living room when the second sound started. It came from the wall to my left, the wall I had punched, the wall where the boy was. Scratch. Tap, tap. It was faint. So faint she might have missed it, if the house hadn't been so quiet. But she heard it. Her movement stopped, her head cocked to the side, a bird listening for a predator. Her gaze shifted from me to the blank expanse of wallpaper. Her fear, already a high, thin wire of tension, now had to accommodate a new, impossible note, a sound that didn't make sense. "What was that?" she whispered. I did not answer. The house had its hooks in her now. It didn't need me for this part. It let the two sounds hang in the air, the memory of my desperate plea, and the new, insistent scratching rhythm from within the walls. Tap, 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 tap. It was faster this time, more frantic, less a call for help, and more a desperate warning. The child. He was trying to tell her, he's not the threat, the walls are the threat. Get out. His tiny, trapped consciousness was screaming in the only way it could. Maya stared at the wall, her knuckles white where she gripped the strap of her purse. Her mind was racing, trying to assemble the pieces. A trapped man who whispers for help. A scratching sound from inside the walls, a door that locked itself. It was too much. The rational explanations, a squatter, a faulty lock, rats, were crumbling under the weight of the impossible. "Hello?" she called out again, her voice directed at the wall now. "Is someone there? Is there a kid in there?" The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was worse. She stood paralyzed in the middle of the room, a triangle of terror. Me, the silent man. The door, the locked escape route. And the wall, the source of the impossible sound. She didn't know which way to run. She didn't know who the victim was, and who the monster was. The house savored her confusion. It let the moment stretch. It let the quiet press in on her, let her imagination paint its own horrors in the dark corners of the room. Then, it gave her the answer. And it was the wrong one. It used my body. With a slowness that was terrifying, my head turned. The motion was stiff, unnatural, like a mannequin on a rotating display. My eyes left her and fixed on the wall where the scratching had been. I raised my left hand and pointed a single, trembling finger at the spot. I saw the understanding dawn on her face, the false and fatal connection she was making. He's the father. The child is his. He's trapped the child in the wall. The horror on her face shifted, and a new emotion began to burn through it. Outrage. Pity. A rescuer's fire. The house had found her weakness, the same weakness it had found in me. The need to save someone. My hijacked mouth opened again. The words were a choked, agonizing sob. A masterful performance of a broken father. "My boy, please, help my boy." It was a lie. A beautiful, terrible, perfect lie. And she believed it. I saw it in the sudden resolve in her eyes. I saw it in the way her fear was pushed aside by a wave of protective fury. She was no longer a victim. She was a savior. She took a step toward the wall. Away from the door. Away from the window. Away from any chance of escape. She was walking deeper into the house's throat. From the wall, the faint tapping started again. A slow, grieving, defeated rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. The child knew. He had tried to warn her, and he had failed. He was tapping out a funeral dirge now. For her. And for me. My hand dropped to my side. My role in this act was over. I was just part of the scenery again. A witness. Maya approached the wall, her hand outstretched, her face a mask of horrified compassion. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice soft and soothing, directed at the child who wasn't there. "I'm here. I'm going to get you out." The house, sated for a moment, let the silence hold. It had her. The new fly was in the web. The song had worked its magic one more time. It was digesting her hope. And it tasted like salvation.